Hello, my name is Dejan Bojkov, Grandmaster from Bulgaria. Today I will continue with the analysis of my students' game, and I continue with the last but one game that Ashrita has run played at the All Girls National. This was the 5th round, and she was paired again with the black pieces. You saw the previous game, she was playing with the black, and now she's again playing with the black pieces, and her opponent is a very strong girl. Her name is Dejan. She is rated just like Ashrita, 1680 something, and she opted for the first move e4. Ashrita still goes for c5, and we have the Alapin line with c3. d5 was played, e takes d5, and d4. E takes d4, c takes d4, and knight c6. It's a good time for me to say a couple of words about the choice of the opening. Ashrita's good points do not include the good knowledge of opening lines. On the contrary, she is a very practical player. She knows a lot of endgames. She understands the game very well, and she is also very sharp tactically. And also, of course, she is a great character. But all these things, they're also helping her in finding a good plan in difficult situations, which is not very typical for an American player. She is not going deeply into the opening. Let me just repeat this. She's trying to study more other things, more chess things, not just memorizing long lines after which she will not know what to do. And the credit for this goes to her current coach, Ted Castro. He's her main coach. And he's the guy who introduced me to the Norcal chess. And Ashrita is not the only girl that I'm helping in this club, and she is not the only champion that he produced, but enough for these lyrics. Now we're going to the game in which knight f3 was played and bishop g4. All these words that I have just said to make you know that she wasn't very aware of the line, and here one very dangerous line goes with knight c3, which wasn't played in the game, but this was played in the game Stevic against Topalov from the Khanty-Mansiysk Olympiad 2010. And after this sharp line, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes d4, queen takes, knight takes, and knight b5, Stevic was in fact able to get the upper hand after knight c7, king d7, knight takes, bishop b4, king to d1, knight e7, and f4. And despite the initiative that Topalov had, he was on the defensive here. The exchange is more important, and also the pair of bishops that White was having in this situation. Okay, at the end he managed to save himself, but as a whole, I think that you already saw the dangers behind this line. Anyways, White opted for bishop e2 instead, knight to f6, knight c3, queen a5, and she castled. This is very solid, very good chess. And here Ashrita showed that she is not very familiar with the line. She decided to go for an aggressive setup, to develop the bishop on g7, and to attack the isolated pawn at once with g6. The problem with this approach is that black is not ready to do it. She is not very well developed, and in fact here there are a couple of ways for White to try and prove that this is not really a good move. The good move is e6, to develop the bishop in this direction as fast as possible, and also to control the d5 square with her pieces as much as possible. For example, if h3 now, just bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and rook d8 even before developing the bishop, to force this bishop to step on e3 to defend the pawn on d4, and now this bishop can go anywhere, on b4, on d6, on e7. Anyway, it's going to be a good game for black. But the game saw g6. White developed bishop to e3. Not a bad move, but I will be looking for more concrete things in this situation. Just have a look how badly black pieces are developed. This king is still in the center, it didn't castle, so I believe it's a good thing to try and bother it at once. One idea is first to attack this bishop with the move h3, and if black takes and tries to speed up her development with bishop g7, then rook e1 is already preventing her from castling, because castling is just losing the pawn on e7, even though this might be the best chance that black is having in this situation. This is about the move h3. There is also an interesting move, queen to b3, immediately attacking the pawn on b7 and the light squares at the same time. Or another way to do this is to play the move d5 at once, trying to get rid of this knight, and afterwards to concretely attack something. With two possible ideas for black. One is to pin the pawn with rook d8, to which queen to b3 looks nasty. This pawn is hanging, the knight is hanging. And after, say, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, which is relatively the best chance that black is having. Well, okay, black manages finally to finish the development, and she even spoiled the opponent's castling. But not castling, but the position in front of the castle king, but she lost the pawn, which, okay, still gives the better chances for the first player. And in this line, if she doesn't want to give away the pawn, if she goes instead of rook d8, knight b4, to try to win the pawn instead, like that, then white has bishop b5 check. That's very unpleasant. That's why d5 was important, to kick away the knight from this position. And after, say, bishop to d7, bishop takes d7, knight takes d7, rook e1, white is easily bringing her pieces into the action. That pawn is targeted, and after bishop g5, it is really very difficult for black to castle. If, okay, she can castle, but she will lose the pawn in that case. And if she tries something like knight f6, then this king in the center of the board is going to suffer. I will give her a moment to find out how. If you need more time, you can pause your videos. The way to reach this king is to advance the pawns in the center and to try to open the files. d6 is very strong, and after e6, d7. The number of the pawns is not important. What is important are the open files and the open diagonals and squares for the white pieces. After knight takes d7, queen d6, I believe that white is winning here. Then rook takes e6 is coming in case of bishop f8, for example. Or there are other ideas that might be working for white as well. Rook d1 is on the agenda. This is on the agenda. Queen e7 is, of course, mating threat. And if you don't trust my words, which is normal, you can actually analyze this at home, and you will see how difficult black's situation is. All right. Luckily for Ashrita, her partner played a bit timid. She played bishop e3 first, bishop g7, and now was the last time to try queen to b3, but she played h3. Actually, not the last time, because after bishop f5, she can still play either queen b3 or d5 with strong threats, but she just decided to develop her pieces with queen d2, which allowed Ashrita to finally castle. Well, the opening phase is over. Now you are about to find a good plan for black in this situation. What are you going to suggest for her? I will give you a moment to think. If you need more time, you can pause the videos. Ashrita chose knight d5, which is a very good move and the beginning of a very good plan to try and to surround the isolated pawn on d4. Knight d5. Just trading this knight on e3. I would do it in another way though, with knight d4 in this situation, which is forcing white to take it anyways. Or otherwise, she's just going to have two weak pawns here instead of one. Isolated and hanging pawns, and e5 is also a threat here for the second player. While after knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, the good thing is, of course, that the queen on a5 is defended, it is not hanging, and black is already threatening to trade queens, which is a very strong positional threat. In positions like that, after that, the isolated pawn on d4 is becoming very, very weak. If you remember the previous game that we have seen, the ideas were quite similar to those that we're seeing right now. I prefer this approach because the bishop on e4 is also very active here. It is hitting the knight on f3, thus making the pawn on d4 more vulnerable than in the game. Okay, but knight e5 is also a great move. Actually, I'm not really sure which one is better. While we were analyzing this game, I suggested here for white an additional resource b4, and then knight to a4, and with the idea to bring this knight on c5, which is an additional option for the first player, but Ashrita found a very good resource for black. Knight takes e3, f takes e3, now bishop e4, intending to meet this knight c5 move with bishop takes, and knight takes d4, which is a very good idea. After e takes d4, bishop takes d4, king somewhere. On the h file, bishop takes, queen takes, and rook takes a1. The endgame should be in favor of black. So we were somehow reaching this position without the pawn on b7, and it wasn't clear, but after analyzing it, I'm reaching it with the pawn on b7. Now black is having 2 pawns and a rook for 2 light pieces, which normally is an advantage in the endgame. Rooks are becoming really very powerful in the endgame. Anyways, this line is of course not necessary. White took on d5 instead. Queen takes d5. Rook fd1. Rook f to d8 was played, so they are just bringing their pieces around that isolated pawn. Black is already having 4 hits. White is having 4 defenders. Black insists she wants to play bishop c2 maybe and to take away one of the defenders, or she wants to play rook d7 and to double the rooks, and after that it will be impossible for white to stand the pressure. e5 is also playable in some moment, but rook ac1, a very good move, because now white also shows teeth, and she says, okay, my pawn on d4 is isolated, but it is giving me some very good squares, the one on c5, for example, which I can use for my rook. And this is giving me some active options. For example, if b6, then very strong for white is just bishop c4. The queen needs to move back, maybe on d7, because on d6 there is bishop f4 with yet another tempo. And on queen d7, then knight g5 is coming, and white, who is having a more free game, is suddenly also starting to create some threats. And also there is bishop b5 coming afterwards to try and to take something on the spin. Therefore, black correctly played here rook ac8, rook c5, this is also correct, queen d7, bishop b5. I'm not very sure about this move, well, especially in conjunction with what happened next. c6, bishop a4, b5, and now the bishop stepped not on b3, which was the good square from where it will exert pressure on f7, just like in the previous line, and then knight g5 might be an idea for the first player, but it stepped on the c2 square, which is immediately giving all the keys to the fortress for black. Just like in the previous game, one more time, after bishop takes c2 and rook takes c2, queen f5, black has reached a position in which the pawn on d4 is really very weak. And after queen d3, she actually has a chance to win it. I will give you some time to try and find out how. If you need more time, of course, you can pause the videos. Remember, Ashrita is very well tactically prepared, and she doesn't miss chances like that usually. She took the pawn on d4 at once. And she's just gaining that pawn. For example, if knight takes d4, then queen takes d3, this rook is hanging, rook needs to take on d3, rook takes d3, knight takes d3, and that one on d3 has been discovered. White is losing the exchange and the pawn. Taking on d4 with the knight is not good. Taking on c8 will allow an intermediate check on f3, and not only the pawn will be lost, but this will be also very weak afterwards. And that one on b2 is also hanging, so black is generally winning here. And finally, queen takes f5 is the move that was played in the game. Knight takes f5, rook takes on d8, rook takes d8, and bishop f4. Okay, now why don't you try to find the best plan for black? Okay, if you need more time, you can pause the videos. What Ashrita played was knight d4 to try and trade these knights. I believe that it makes more sense now to give a check first on d1 and after king h2 to prepare some attack of the pawns on the queen's flank with the move bishop f6. Say if rook is coming now to c6, then black is just going to take these pawns, bishop b2, rook is coming on a1, and to take both of them, and at the same time to try to keep the one on b5. While the immediate rook b1 know that this is not working, and this is something that prevented Ashrita from playing this line, because she saw that after this check on c8, and knight e5. Knight d7 is a very nasty threat, and not only knight d7, but sometimes if this knight is chased away with a move like g4, then the bishop on f8 can be lost after bishop h6 as well. So she played first knight d4. Actually, this is not bad at all. In fact, it should be winning as well, especially after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. If now rook c6, again there is bishop takes b2, and then rook to d3, or even first a5, which is also not bad at all. So what white played here was rook to d2, bishop b6. The bishop endgame should be easily won for the second player. She's just going to advance the pawns in the center, bring the king on e6 and d5, and after that attack on both the flanks, this flank, and create a pass pawn on the e or the f file. So white is correctly avoiding this trade. She played rook to e2, rook check, king f2, and here comes the mistake by black. She played bishop c5. It is a mistake because now white has a chance to go into a rook endgame, and in the rook endgame, the defender is usually having the most chances to defend when being pawn down. This will be the case in that game too. I think that the move king f8 is winning the game. And well, black was afraid of this because after this check, there might be some dangers, but I don't see any dangers at all. Bishop to g5 can be answered here e6, and everything is defended. That king can further on come on this square and to defend c6, c7, and c8 and everything, and the rook is also defending it. And further on, black is going to advance her pawns like that: f5, bishop d4, and e5. In fact, the move bishop h6 has helped black a bit to bring her king close to the center. But even if she didn't do that, after say f6, king f7, and e5, little by little, black is going to improve her position and to win this endgame. All her pieces are very well placed. Well, this only mistake was in fact enough for the game to end in a draw, because after b4, black is forced to trade the bishops. Because the other option, bishop b6, can be answered rook e7, bishop f2, and bishop h6 with the mating threat. And now this attack with bishop g1 is not bringing the desired effect, because white is just going king f4. Again, there is mating threat, and if black is forced to go to passively defend like that, this means that white should be out of any danger. She's just going to have very active pieces, and this king can further on try and get into the opponent's camp. And well, black cannot attack that easily at all, with the bishop only remaining active on g1. Okay, this didn't happen in the game because Ashrita played bishop to d6, but the problem with bishop d6 after b4 is that bishop takes d6, e takes d6, otherwise the pawn on e7 is hanging. It's also losing a pawn for the second player, and after rook to a8, this should be objectively speaking a draw, even though Ashrita managed to play for a win in this situation too. Rook d5 was a very neat move, and now she had in mind the following maneuver. Maybe you can find out which was that maneuver. If you need more time, you can pause your videos. That maneuver was king f6, followed by king e5, king d4, and then this king is getting in here to attack the pawns on the queen side. The rook on d5 is defending both b5 and d6, and is ready to jump on f5. At first, white didn't understand what's going on. Otherwise, she would have traded the pawns with a4, and this is the correct move. After which the position remains a draw. The less pawns there are on the queen's flank, the better the chances are. If white just manages to trade that b pawn for the d6 pawn, it's an immediate draw, of course. So trades of pawns are the best defensive resource for the first player here. But she played king g3, king to e5, king f3, king to d4. So Ashrita accomplished her plan. Rook e7, check on f5, king e2, king c3. And now, additionally to the idea of the attack of these two pawns, there is also the march of the d pawn, which is worrying white. Therefore, she played first rook d7, d5, then she gave a check, king b3, rook a7, d4. This pawn is becoming really nasty because d3 is already a threat, and then black can take many pawns here on the king's flank, maybe all of them. That's why white played rook d7, king c4, and this is the moment in which Ashrita lost the last chances to play for a win. I think that the only way to try and to keep on playing for a win is to take the pawn on a3, to trade that one for the one on d4, and after king c3, black is going to be very active. She is still intending to take that pawn on b4, either after a maneuver like that, or just bringing the rook on the fourth rank somehow, if white leaves this rank. And then black will try to come and take the pawn on f7, and maybe the one on h7, but this is going to be already very risky for her, because the b pawn protected by both the king and the rook is becoming extremely dangerous. At some moment this pawn is going to win the rook, and the question is how many pawns, first of all, white managed to take on the king's flank. Most probably it will be only one or two, because black can first place the pawn on h5, so they are like that, nobody can take them easily. And secondly, how fast she is when advancing the king and creating a pass pawn in this side of the board. In any case, black keeps decent winning chances. While what happened in the game was an immediate draw. King c4, here a check, one more check. Well, black correctly realized that if now this rook is traded for the one on f5 immediately, the pawn endgame should be won for black, because this pawn on b5 is tapping two of the opponent's pawns, and she's practically having an extra central pawn on d4. You can analyze this, and I'm pretty sure that you will discover that it's completely winning for the second player. Just king is coming to c4, and afterwards white is going to be in Zugzwang. She is going to lose these two pawns. Or the other plan is to advance the pawn to stalemate the king and to force white to move the a pawn, which will lead to a mate. But the problem is that white is having first the intermediate check on f3, king f4 is forced, and king d3. And now black is forced to take on c5, after which this pawn endgame is already a draw, because this pawn will be traded for the one on d4, and the rest is a draw. Nobody can win this game. King e5, c6, king d6, c7 was played. The other attempt is also not winning for white. On the contrary, if white is not careful in this endgame, she can even lose. In this line, for example, it is black who is faster. Say f5 just takes, and b2, f6, g8 queen. It is black who wins. So white correctly avoided this line. She played something else, and the game was a draw afterwards. She played c7, king takes c7, king takes d4. Seemingly white is more active, but black is having these two squares to defend herself. After g3, g5, f4, f6, f5, h5. Okay, she also plays this pawn here, so that there is also an additional option to come and take this pawn and eventually to promote the h1. But this is never going to happen, because white is also waiting. Here she has these two squares for her king, the d3 and the c3 squares. And now, well, okay, black doesn't have time to run for this pawn, because white is also running for that one, and the a pawn is going to be promoted. And after some repetition of moves here, king b6, king d4, king c6, king c3, king c5, king d3, the players agreed the draw. This was the only draw that Ashrita gave to her opponents at these national championships, and it was a very tough game, as you could see.